Hello, my name's Roisin, and I'm a book snob. Hello friends, and welcome back to another video. The intro is a little misleading, but I thought that it would be really interesting today to go on my Goodreads and to review the books I have read that have the most ratings. So this is not necessarily the highest rated books on my read shelf, but the books that have the highest number of ratings. I saw this on Jeans Bookish Thoughts channel and I thought it was a really interesting idea because I am wondering if I dislike books that are really popular or if I have the same opinions and I understand why these books are popular in the first place. The thing about my Goodreads read shelf is that it only counts books that I've read in 2019 and 2020 because I knew if I tried to do earlier ones I'd get really frustrated about the fact that I would have forgotten books and I would not have all of the books that I had read. So now I know it is an accurate portrayal of what I've read in the last year and 9 months. Rather than being an inaccurate portrayal of the books that I've read in my life. So I am going to go into my read shelf and organise it by number of ratings and see what I think of the books that have been the most hyped, I suppose, the most read books that I have read in the past nearly 2 years. Right, now that I've worked out how to sort it by number of ratings on my laptop, which is what I'm using because I'm filming on my phone, that was a palaver. But here we are, so we will see which books they are that have the most ratings. I have a feeling it's going to be classics, because obviously they've been around for a long time and people feel like they have to read them, people read them for school, so I feel like they will be highly up there. I won't have anything like Harry Potter or anything because I haven't read them in the last 2 years. So the first one here is Brave New World, which I actually read in September, so that will be in my September wrap-up. But I didn't love this book. I was kind of confused by what it was aiming at. It seemed to be critiquing both American-style capitalism and also socialism, and it didn't really seem to have much of a perspective. It was like, this way of living is bad, but also this way of living is bad, and it felt like it was critiquing women's sexual freedom as being bad. It just didn't seem to have a point or a perspective, and it was very, very strange. And so I didn't absolutely love this. I understand why it's a classic, because it's sort of the first ever dystopia. It was a reaction to H.G. Wells' Utopias. So the idea of having a dystopian novel, most of them are inspired by, at least indirectly, this book. So I can see why you'd want to read the first one, and definitely in terms of world building, I think it did a pretty good job of building up the system and how the system works. It doesn't tell you why that system came about, but that's not something that really interests me in dystopias anyway. I want to see them as a commentary on the world rather than get big into how this happened. I don't think that that's particularly important because dystopias are usually allegorical anyway, so it doesn't really matter the exact steps that it came to. And I thought that the way that it started off set in a fertility clinic, which is basically where they make people in test tubes, and the way that they form people to be less intelligent or more intelligent, and the way that they brainwash people, I thought that that was really well set up, and I can see how much it has inspired other books since. But in terms of actual plot and like direction, what it was trying to say, I don't think it held up that much. Next is, as I thought, another classic, and that is Frankenstein by Mary Shelley, which I read when I was reading science fiction books for a week, which again I will leave in cards above. Then not a book I loved, but one I understood why it was popular as a progenitor of science fiction and horror. So I guess that's why these books are classics, is because of the impact that they've had on literature. So them as their individual book doesn't mean as much as the legacy that their books have left. I preferred Frankenstein to Brave New World, not that they're really that easy to directly compare, but again I felt that there was a lot of monologues, a lot of talking about morality, which came across as quite heavy-handed, and also the three main men that you hear from the voices of, they all sound exactly the same, but I think that that's because of a difference between a modern understanding of the novel and what Mary Shelley was trying to do with the novel, which was still a fairly novel form novel at the time that she was writing. But yeah, it was one that I couldn't quite get to grips with because I just couldn't seem to care or understand people's motives, but it was very beautifully written and I could see why it had such a big impact at the time. Okay, next is the worst book that I've read this year, The Woman in the Window by A.J. Finn, which, I should say, so Brave New World has 1.4 million ratings, Frankenstein has 1.15 million ratings, and then it's a massive jump, and The Woman in the Window has 443,000 ratings, so it's much less than the two classics that I mentioned before. The Woman in the Window I read when I was reading thrillers for a week, which I will leave in the cards. It's probably going to be too many videos to leave in the cards, but I'll try and leave some of them. But I hated this book. Thrillers should be thrilling, and this book was incredibly boring for the first half and then incredibly predictable for the second half. The Woman in the Window is about a woman who is agoraphobic and alcoholic, and she doesn't leave her house, and she watches people through her window in the style of Rear Window, and she sees something happen from her window, and nobody will believe her because she's so unreliable, because she's agoraphobic and she is an alcoholic, and so people won't trust her account. She doesn't even know whether it's real or not, so it's kind of an unreliable narrator situation. It uses the idea of classic movies to talk about things, and then it used lines from classic movies that gave away the ending of the book. There is also a villain monologue on a rooftop in a rain that ends with someone pushed through a window. Can you get any more cliched and obvious than that? And I just thought it was so obvious what was going to happen, and it was also so boring at the same time. It wasn't even that it was boring because I knew it was going to happen, it was also boringly written. And then there's the whole thing about A.J. Finn, which I will leave a link to in the description if you don't know about that, but yeah, I definitely would not recommend that one at all. So number 4 is Crazy Rich Asians by Kevin Kwan, which has 329.9, so 330 basically thousand reviews. And I can understand why this has so many reviews, made into a major film. I think the film was better than the book. I know that's not supposed to be what you say, but well, I guess the film lost some of the satire from the book. A lot of the book is satire of this incredibly wealthy place, but it is also kind of very vulgar, and a lot of the jokes seem to be a little off colour for me personally, and also I felt like there's just so many like random plot lines that you're like, I don't understand why this is happening in the book. So it is about a girl who is Chinese, is born to Chinese parents in America, and she grows up in America. She meets this guy, they fall in love, and that he invites her to go to Singapore to visit his family, only to discover his family are one of the richest families in Singapore, and they do not approve of her because of her family, and because she is not wealthy, because she doesn't understand what's going on in Singapore society, and she gets into all sorts of scrapes because she has come home with him, which is a big symbol that he is probably going to propose to her. And so like his ex-girlfriends, his mum, his grandma, there's a whole situation. But I think that the film was better because the film streamlined some of the crazy entanglement plot lines situation, and took out some of the less palatable jokes, but it still has a fairly terrible sense of humour. I can't remember the actor's name, but he plays Chang in Community, and I don't think he's very funny in either of those things. Next is a non-fiction, and that is The Life-Changing Magic of Tidying Up, The Japanese Art of Decluttering by Marie Kondo, which has 275,600 ratings. And obviously this was a publishing phenomena and was absolutely everywhere, so I know why everybody read it. Everyone was talking about Marie Kondoing the house, except it's actually the KonMari method in the book, but it became Marie Kondoing because of the Netflix show, I think. Oh, I've gone really dark. I talked about this in a vlog as well, and I had some trouble with this book. I thought that it was an interesting way to go about things, going by category rather than by room, so you don't just end up shunting things around your house. I think that was very clever, and also trying to do it all at once. I don't believe that if you do it once you'll never have to tidy again, because that's just not feasible. I also found that there was like a string of fat phobia going through this, no understanding of privilege going through this. Like, it was not a book really written considering the times. Like, I feel like if you're writing a non-fiction book now, you have to kind of consider all of those things, and it did not. Like, a book about tidying sounds like it shouldn't have to care about privilege, but it really does, because not everyone can afford to just throw things out and get the best one. So I think just watch the Netflix show if you're interested in her ideas and methods. I don't think you need to read the book. There's a lot of repetition in it. Number 6 is The Raven Boys, which is book number 1 in the Raven cycle, which I read because it's so hyped on BookTube, and I thought I would give it a go because everybody loves it, and I actually really enjoyed it. I am not a YA reader. YA fantasy is definitely not my thing. I didn't think I was going to get into this as much as I did, but it was definitely a very fun book, a very fun read. And also because I love books that are slightly magical, books that are a bit weird and don't explain their magic system. The Raven Boys is about these 4 boys who go to a school where the symbol is a raven. I can't remember what the school is called, something that's from Wales. Anyway, and they meet this girl, Blue, who, her mother is a psychic and she lives in a house of psychics, but she's not psychic herself. And they, Gansey, the leader of the boys, is trying to find Glendower, Owen Glendower, who was a king in Wales, who's apparently been buried in Virginia, and they're trying to find him, and they end up in this kind of semi-magical world, and there's a lot going on. But I gave this book 4 stars. I really enjoyed it. I love that the magic, I thought it was really beautifully described, and I love that you never really know what's going on. And I definitely thought it was a good, fun, easy read, which is not something that I read a lot of, because I don't read YA and contemporary and that. But this was I feel like you need someone to guide you through those genres, because there's so much published, to find the stuff that's actually works for you, and the Raven Boys did work for me because of the magic mostly, but I kind of wish it had been a bit more about the psychic's house and a bit less about the boys, because I just care more about magic women who can do magic, they're my thing, and this wasn't really about that. But other than that, I really did think that this was really beautifully written for a YA book, and I probably will reread them at some point. Number 7 is The 7 Husbands of Evelyn Hugo, fittingly enough. So this one has 211,600 ratings and was obviously incredibly popular last year, I think it came out last year, and everybody was talking about it, everybody was raving about it, everybody loved it so much. Not so much for me. It is the story of Evelyn Hugo, who is a movie star in the 1950s, 60s, and her relationship with a woman. I don't think that's a spoiler, she's bisexual. It's about her relationship, her 7 husbands, and also her relationship with this woman, and her experience of growing up, and her experience of being famous, and also of sexuality in that time period. And then also there's a journalist, Monique, who she is allowing to interview her for the first time. She's done a major interview in years, and so she's telling the story of her life to this interviewer, and that's kind of the framing of the book. I felt like Monique's points were entirely pointless. There was no reason for Monique to be there, and it was just felt shoved in order to have a sort of modern every woman character, so that we could kind of identify with Monique, and whilst we looked back into this history, but it felt kind of pointless. I also felt the writing was really basic and gossipy, and there was no real style or substance to it. It was just kind of plain, and so I didn't love that. There were a lot of coincidences in the plot that seemed to just happen for no reason, or in order for the writer to comment on politics of the time period, rather than feeling organic to the plot. And just generally speaking, I thought it was not that well constructed. Another book that everybody loved this year and last year that I didn't is Pachinko by Min Jin Lee, which is the next one, which has 202,367 ratings, and everybody loves it. Everybody loves this book. I wanted to love it because it's historical fiction set outside of Europe and the North America, which is one of my something that I've really been getting into recently. And this is set in South Korea, about South Koreans who end up emigrating to Japan, and their experience in Japan during and after the Second World War, and the racism that South Koreans experience in Japan. It's about this one family, and it follows various different members of this family, various descendants, etc. I felt that this book was too detached from its characters, and would suddenly hop forward in time and change characters' focus in a way that meant I never really got to grips with what was going on or the motivations of any of the characters. Everything felt like it was just being said in a very blank forward way and was not integrated with the characters, and I ended up not really being interested in finding out what was going on. I also felt like a lot of tragic things happened to these characters rather than happening because of actions that the characters were taking. So they just sort of felt out of the blue and dropped in there for shock value and to manipulate you emotionally, which is not my favourite thing in a book. Some aspects of it were pretty good, but the writing was not my style. Didn't have enough description, enough bite to it. It was very plain and flat, which can work sometimes when detachment is part of the plot, but detachment is not part of this plot, and so I didn't really like that distancing feeling of it. It felt like Min Jin Lee was really interested in this period of history and was just trying to tell you things that had happened by putting these characters in them, rather than exploring the characters and their motivations and their thoughts. So I didn't love this one. Next is David Copperfield by Charles Dickens, which has 198,000 ratings and was an audiobook that I listened to with Richard Armitage narrating it, and I actually really enjoyed this. I wasn't sure I was going to like Dickens, and there were elements of it that I didn't like, because Dickens wrote serializations, so it was published in the newspaper and he was paid by the word basically, so he just tries to write as much as possible. So there are some random tangents that feel really pointless, and the morality is kind of heavy-handed a lot of the time. However, the characters are really funny, and it is definitely a work in stereotypes, but I think he does a good job of them. The characters aren't deep most of the time. There isn't a lot of development or the modern understanding of the way that we'd like characters to be, but I think that the fact there are so many characters and the tableau that he weaves is really good, and I like the way that David Copperfield goes through different periods of his life in different areas of society. Like he starts off living in the countryside and being fairly well off, and then he ends up in a boarding school for boys, and then he ends up working as a child, being a child labourer and living with his aunt, and he kind of goes through these levels and he meets lots of different people from lots of different walks of life, and that is a really good insight into Victorian life and the many different aspects of it. And then finally, The Haunting of Hill House by Shirley Jackson, which has 155,000 reviews and is another classic. So I think 4 out of 10 of them have been classics, as I predicted would be quite common. And this is one that I read when I was reading horror for a week, and it is about a Hill House which is haunted, and these 4 people go there to see if they can discover if it's haunted, how it's haunted, can they contact these ghosts. I really liked the writing of this book, especially during the daytime. I thought that the atmosphere of the book, the tension between the characters, was really, really well done. In the evening, when the scary horror things happen, I felt less intrigued by what was going on and a bit more bored, although there was one point a character was lying down with her hand out holding another character's hand, but she was cold and there was dark and there was lots of like terror in it that I did feel quite tense, but it never really got me to the level of scared. The interactions between the 2 women felt very dated, but this was written in the 1950s. So that is all of the most popular books on my TBR. A few of them I liked, most of them were kind of average for me, which I think makes sense, because if something has broad appeal, I feel like it's often not going to have deep appeal. So a lot of people will think it's good but not the best thing ever, whereas if it is less popular, you'll have people who really, really love it. There just won't be as many of them, because it will be more specifically directed, whereas something that has broad appeal is more broad necessarily. As I thought there would be a lot of classics that I guess some people had to read for school, or people just feel like they need to read, and also, you know, have been around for over 100 years, some of them, so there's more time for people to have read them. Please let me know in the comments what you think of any of these books, if you've read them, and what you think about popular books in general. Do you think that they tend to be more broad-based and so you're less likely to fall deeply in love with them? And please remember to give this video a thumbs up if you liked it, and to subscribe, because I put out new videos every Wednesday, Friday and Sunday. So I will see you again soon. Bye bye!